One of the things that we've been enjoying recently has been the rain. There's been a lot of rain in certain areas, and in a sense it seems like maybe the volume of rain that we're getting has been given to us as a test to make sure that we are prepared for handling different things like that. Now, in the early history of our country, there were many pioneers who moved from new parts of the country, and along the way, and when they got there, they experienced many situations, many tests, trials that they were experiencing. And in many cases, there was a lot of suffering involved with it. As they were passing through the desert, they experienced many situations, or the Indian attacks that happened. And sometimes, a wagon would be driving along and go over a rough stone and a wheel would fall off. Other accidents happened. All of these things seem to be given as a test for these people. Only the strong were the ones who survived. The weak, the uncommitted, they would either turn back or they perished in the attempt to get to this new home. Testing is something that just seems to happen to us all the time. And God has various ways that He tests His people. In Deuteronomy, the 8th chapter and the 2nd verse, the writer says, "You shall remember all the way which the Lord your God has led you in the wilderness these 40 years, that He might humble you, testing you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep His commandments or not." Testing is something that God does to His people and has been doing it basically ever since Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden. We all experience many different types of tests. And there's not a one of us who doesn't experience some form of test. If we think about the way that God tested Abraham, in Genesis, the 22nd chapter, verses 1 through 6, and then skipping down to verse 12. "Now it came about after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, 'Abraham.' And he said, 'Here I am.' The Lord said, 'Take now your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you.' So Abraham arose early in the morning and saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son. And he split wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. Abraham said to his young men, 'Stay here with the donkey, and the lad and I will go over there, and we will worship and return to you.' Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife, and the two walked on together." We know the rest of the story. The way that Isaac questions, "Where is the lamb for the sacrifice?" God answered through Abraham and said, "The Lord will provide." Abraham was being tested. From the time that the Lord announced to Abraham he wanted him to go and offer his son, Abraham had days to think about what was going to happen. The rest of the day, they got up the next morning and they began the journey. It was the third day later that they see the place, and yet it's still afar off. There's still plenty of time. Abraham could have turned his back and said, I'm not going to do this. But Abraham trusted God and said the Lord would provide. And then in verse 12, he said to him, do not stretch out your hand against the lad, and do nothing to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Abraham passed the test. And it's a wonderful story for us because it helps us understand faith. And it helps us understand that we can trust in God. There were others that we read about in Scripture who trusted God as well. Think about Job. Oh, what a hard story to think about. In Job, the first chapter, verses 6 through 12, the story is told about the things that Job lost as part of his test. He lost his family, 7 sons and 3 daughters. He lost property, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and very many servants. That's a hard loss to endure. That's a hard test that God put on him. How did Job handle this? When we look a little bit further in the first chapter of Job, verses 20 through 22, then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Through all of this, Job did not sin, nor did he blame God. So many times we have things happen to us. When you look at what happened to Job, even things that we think are very serious are just piddly. Job did not blame God. And guess what? The test was not over. We look at the second chapter in verse 9 verses, and we have a story as it continues on being described there. And the bottom line on it is, Job, in addition to having lost all of this other in the first chapter, he now has physical problems. He's affected with boils that cover him from the top of his head to the soles of his feet. And they are so intense that all he can do is sit there with a little piece of scrap pottery and scrape away the oozing from the boils. And if that's not enough, notice I said earlier when Job lost his family, it was just his kids. He didn't lose his wife. And the way that she's described to us here in the second chapter, Job is left with boils and a nagging wife. What was Job's response? He answered his wife when she said that he needed to curse God and die. In Job 2, verse 10, but he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. When we read the description of Job, he is described as being one of the most prosperous men to ever lived. Or at least in this area, he had it. He had the largest flocks, the largest fields. He had the most wonderful family. And when you read the description about the kids, it seems as though they never had to do any work at all. That they were able to live off of what the Father was giving them. And he goes from being the top rung to the very bottom of the heap. Nothing left. Just the sorrow of missing his children and sitting there in boils with a wife that is not supporting him. But we're also told that after he passes this test, the Lord blesses him with another set of 10 children and twice as much property as he had before. When we pass God's test, he can give us wonderful rewards for doing these things. We also have examples of people in the New Testament who are being tested. And I guess one of the ones that had the largest, the strongest, most intense testing against him would have been Paul. In 2 Corinthians, the 11th chapter, beginning in the 23rd verse and going through 28, he describes some of the tests that he faced. He says, "Are they servants of God?" Speaking about those that had been griping against him and speaking against him. He says, "Are they servants of Christ? I speak as if I am insane. I more so. In far more labors, in far more imprisonments, beaten times without number, often in danger of death. 5 times I received of the Jews 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I've spent in the deep. I've been on frequent journeys, in dangers from river, in dangers from robbers, in dangers from my countrymen, in dangers from the Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, dangers on the sea, dangers among false brethren. I have been in labor and hardship, through many sleepless nights, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure." Think about all of those. And then he turns around and says, apart from these external things, there is a daily pressure on me of concern for all the churches. Think about Paul and all of the different congregations that he had worked with. Those people were special to him. And as he knew that they were facing trials and temptations, nowhere near the level that he was, but as they faced trials and temptations, he was thinking about them. He was concerned for them. He kept praying for them. He was tested. tested very hard. Even Christ was tested. In Hebrews, the 4th chapter and the 15th verse, there is a description that helps us understand that Christ faced the same type of things that we do. Hebrews 4:15, for we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things as we are, yet without sin. That's one of the wonderful things. And we know that man, as we are, we all fall short. We sin. But it takes effort and concentration on our part. Because we are constantly facing tests. And we've got to make sure that we hang in there, that we persevere, that we endure. James 1:12 says, blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him. It's a measure of our love to see how deeply we love Christ, and it's measured by the way that we face these tests. Are we going to overcome them? Are we going to persevere? In 1 Corinthians, the 4th chapter, verses 11 through 13, Paul writes and says, to this very present hour, we are both hungry and thirsty. We are poorly clothed and roughly treated and are homeless. We toil, working with our own hands. When we are reviled, we bless. When we are persecuted, we endure. When we are slandered, we try to conciliate. We have become as the scum of the world, the dregs of all things, even until now. We thought that other list that Paul gave was long and hard, and it didn't cover everything that he did. Because one of the things that he includes in this little bit here is the fact that he did not have the support needed for him to do all the things that he did. He had to go out and work to do what was needed. He had to earn for him to take care of himself. He had to earn to take care of those that were with him. He had to work to make sure he had the resources he needed to reach out to others and help bring them to Christ. The way that he describes all of this to Timothy is found in 2 Timothy verses 11 and 12. And he said, it is a trustworthy statement. For if we died with him, we will also live with him. If we endure, we will also reign with him. If we deny him, he will deny us. Paul knew that it was important for him to remain strong and remain faithful, because if he ever stopped supporting and working for Christ, it's kind of a black and white situation. He's either working for Christ or he's not. And if he's not working for Christ, he begins denying him. One way or the other. And he says that if we deny Christ, Christ will deny us. So we've got to be strong and work so that we overcome. In 1 John, the 2nd chapter, verses 12 and 13, John wrote and said, I am writing to you, little children, because your sins have been forgiven you for his name's sake. I'm writing to you, fathers, because you know him who has from the beginning, who has been from the beginning. I'm writing to you, young men, because you have overcome the evil one. I have written to you, children, because you know the Father. These groups that he's writing to here understand God, understand Christ, and want to serve. They want to be strong. They want to face the test and overcome. And it helps them get to a knowledge of the Father that is impossible to attain when you don't try to overcome, when you don't have the faith to endure. Yeah, we're tested. We're all tested. We're all being tempted. But the temptation does not come from God. This is test that this is test that the Father puts on us, but Satan puts the temptations in it. God makes things strong, but he's not going to allow us to face anything we can't handle. That's what Paul wrote in Romans. Satan wants to intentionally stick his foot out for us to trip over something. He's tempting us to make us fall. God is testing us. And just like we see weightlifters as they are lifting weights, and the stronger and the heavier the weight that they lift, the stronger they become. But God does not tempt us to fall. In James 1, verses 13 through 15, let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. And then when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. Satan could put all kinds of temptations in front of us, but unless it's an area where we're not weak already, it's not going to be effective. For those of us that just flat out do not like alcohol, it's not a temptation for somebody to have alcohol near us. It doesn't bother us because it's not going to get to us. But there's other things that each of us may be weak at, that Satan knows we are weak at, and he's going to put that out there right in front of us, and it's going to pop up every time that we turn around. It's going to be all over the place because he knows he can trip us with it. May take us a little while, but sooner or later, the things that we lust for, he's going to have out there, and we'll trip over that. I mentioned earlier that these tests are given to us to help us be strong for serving God. But it's also a way for us to measure for ourselves what our love of God really is and what our love of Christ really is. There is a statement that Christ says in John the 14th chapter and the 15th verse that really sums it all up for us. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. When we fail to keep Christ's commandments, God's commandments, that says we don't love them. It says we're willing to take and let this temptation overtake us because we love whatever the temptation is more than we love God. We've got to make sure that all of these tests that are put before us, that we persevere and overcome. And that's going to help show how much we truly love Christ. Our lives will show that. And it'll show it to those that are around us, because the things that we do and the things that we don't do help them realize that we have been studying God's Word. We know what God and Christ want us to do. We know the things that are going to keep us from entering into a relationship with them. And so as we have tests put in front of us, and as we have temptations put in front of us, our lives will show how we answer those tests. This morning, think about your life. How have you been answering the test that Christ and God have put in front of you? Think about the test that Job had, that Abraham had, and that they were able to overcome. Think about all of the things that Paul faced and he was able to overcome. What are you facing? And how well are you overcoming? Are you facing the trials of the same intensity that Paul did? Probably not. Are you letting little piddly things trip you up? And do you need help being able to overcome those things? All of us have weakness. And we all need the strength of each other to overcome those things. And this morning, if you realize that you're in a situation where your strength level is diminishing and you need help to get stronger and overcome the trials and temptations and the tests that you're facing, and you need the help of your brothers and sisters, you need to approach God in prayer and ask Him for strength. If there's anything we can do to help you, we want you to let us know. Just as if there is anything that we need, we would let you know. Or if you've never started receiving the kind of protection and strength and encouragement that the Lord gives, and you need to put the Lord on in baptism, that opportunity is also available this morning. If there's anything that is going to help you to overcome and going to help you to pass these tests that we can do to help you, please let us know as we sing our song of encouragement.